Hi, thank you so much for tuning into this video. I decided to talk a little bit about what's going on with Israel and Palestine. I'm sure you've already seen the Hamas-Israeli war dominating your news and social media feeds, but hear me out. I originally wanted to make a video with a more neutral stance on the situation, but the more I researched and paid attention to reactions around the world to what's going on, the more I realized that supporting Israel in their effort to destroy Hamas is the most important message to get out there. I'm also seeing a lot of reactions that I believe are lacking a moral understanding of the situation in the middle of the biggest spike of antisemitism I've seen in my lifetime, and something has to be said about it. I don't believe the average person has ill intent with their commentary on what's going on, but I do think many don't realize the full extent of what they're saying and pushing, and they're making false moral equivalencies. I see lots of calls for a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, and I see posts on social media and statements made by elected officials classifying Israel as a genocidal ethnic cleansing state. This classification is false on its head, and I'm here to tell you why we need to stand with Israel in destroying Hamas for the betterment of Israel, Palestine, and the world. I especially appreciate you watching this video if you don't agree with this premise, and I encourage you to be open-minded and hear a pro-Israel perspective that you may or may not agree with. I'll be talking a bit about the history surrounding Israel and Palestine, but we'll focus mostly on what's going on now because I think it's important that we understand what's happening in Gaza. First off, what is Palestine and what is Israel? Israel is a country in the Middle East that's considered to be biblical Holy Land to the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and was officially founded as a country in 1948. It is located by the Mediterranean Sea and is bordered by Lebanon to the north, Syria and Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the south. Palestine's not a country, but declared itself a state in 1988 and claims the territories of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. The word Palestine comes from the Romans who renamed Judea Aelia Palestina in an attempt to disconnect the Jews from identifying with the land. Aelia Palestina comes from the Philistines, who were enemies of the Jews at the time. Now, some of this conflict comes from disputes over who has the right to own the land in Israel. Israel currently comprises 0.1% of the landmass in the Middle East and is surrounded by 22 Arab and Muslim countries. If we take a look back in history, we see that the Jews have been in this land since around 1200 BCE, well before any Christians or Muslims walked the earth. Since the Jews have lived there, they've been occupied by the Persians, the Romans, the Byzantines, and the Ottoman Empire in 1517 up until World War I when the UK took over. This isn't even all of the groups that have occupied this territory, but point being, lots of dynasties and empires came and went and the Jews were subjected to their rule. After the Ottoman Empire dissolved, Jewish immigration from Europe to the Holy Land greatly increased, especially during the 1930s, once Germany's Nazi regime began persecuting Jews. Rising nationalism among the Arabs, which spawned from a resistance to Jewish immigration, led to the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, which then led to the British in 1937 recommending partitioning Palestine into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. In a legal sense, the Jewish people obtained the land of Israel from the British in 1948. Now, what events led to there being thousands of Palestinian refugees enduring terrible living conditions, and where did they come from? Many of these Palestinian refugees come from Mandatory Palestine, which existed in the region of Palestine from 1920 to 1948 under the terms of the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. Many of them were told to leave by their own Arab leaders in anticipation of war, or were expelled from the country over the course of the 1947 to 1949 Palestine War and the Six-Day War of 1967. The Palestine War is also when Nakba occurred, which was a period in which many Palestinians were violently displaced or dispossessed from Israel. However, there are differing historical conclusions as to what led many of the Palestinians to leave. In the 1948 Declaration of Israel's Independence, a passage calls for Arabs to stay in Israel and enjoy the same rights as its Jewish citizens. It reads like this: "We appeal, in the very midst of the onslaught launched against us now for months, to the Arab inhabitants of the State of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship and due representation in all its provisional and permanent institutions." Keep in mind that this was written in the middle of an ongoing war with the Arab nations. So what led to these wars breaking out that resulted in mass displacement? Well, the reaction to Israel's creation did. The first Arab-Israeli War of 1948 began when 5 Arab nations began invading the former Palestinian Mandate directly following the independence of Israel on May 14, 1948. The Arab League refused to recognize the UN partition plan and proclaimed that the whole of Palestine belongs to the Arabs. Essentially, this is the same mindset that has led to nearly every conflict in the region since then, and what we are still seeing today, which is that Israel does not have a right to exist on this land, and violence must be used as a means to end their colonization. The Six-Day War of 1967 similarly began with Arab threats of wiping Israel out and a mobilization of Arab forces at Israel's border. A few factors led to this, such as growing tension over Egypt's closing of the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, a Syrian-Egyptian military pact which Iraq and Jordan later joined, and the expulsion of the UN emergency force from the Sinai Peninsula. You could easily find several examples of Israeli violence and expulsions against Arabs. However, crafting your entire viewpoint towards Israel based on specific instances of violence is missing the big picture. We have to ask ourselves why these scenarios keep happening. For as long as it's existed, Israel's been bordered by countries who do not believe they have a right to exist as a state and have turned down every peace deal ever offered to them, such as the Partition Plan of 1947, which was accepted by the Jews but rejected by the Arabs, the Egyptian-Israeli peace deal of 1979, which resulted in the Arab states economically boycotting Egypt and Egypt's President Anwar Sadat being assassinated, the Oslo Accords, or the 2000 Camp David proposal, which was rejected by PLO leader Yasser Arafat, who then initiated a violent terror war that resulted in the death of 1,184 Israelis. People demand that Israel end their occupation of Palestine, but Israel already pulled away and gave Palestine the benefit of the doubt in 2005 by completely withdrawing all Israeli troops and Jewish settlements from Gaza and gave Palestine full autonomy with various energy sources and billions of dollars in foreign aid. Instead of turning Gaza into a peaceful and prosperous country, the terrorist group Hamas was elected, and these resources were used to create a permanent terrorist camp meant to destroy Israel. Much of the foreign aid was used to build underground tunnels for terrorism and to form a supply chain of weaponry from Iran. This and Hamas's rise to power eventually led to the sea and air blockade of Gaza, led by Israel and Egypt, to contain Hamas and limit their weapons imports. There was another peace plan in 2008 offered by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, which was rejected outrightly by Mahmoud Abbas without a counteroffer. And Donald Trump's peace plan was rejected before even being seen. Speaking of Hamas, the violence we're seeing now isn't stemming from a land dispute, but it comes from a deep hatred towards the Jewish people simply for existing in Israel. As we saw with the Arab revolts and pogroms against Jews, anti-Jewish sentiments have existed in the area for decades and whole wars have been fought over it. A sense of Arab nationalism combined with ongoing antisemitism gave way for the political and military organization Hamas to be formed in 1987 after the first intifada against Israel. Intifada, a word you'll hear often, is an Arabic rallying cry for an uprising and is frequently used during invasions and attacks on Israel as a cry for ending their occupation of the land. Hamas presented themselves as an armed resistance to end the occupation, and they were elected by Palestinians to represent them in 2006. Hamas supports Islamic-only rule, holds that the existence of Israel is inherently illegitimate, rejects the proposed two-state solution to the conflict, and promotes an uncompromising position on the creation of a Palestinian state based on Islamic fundamentalism stretching from the Mediterranean east to the Jordan River. Their founding covenant also calls for the worldwide extermination of Jews, blames the Jews for previous wars and for running the world and its wealth, and states that every peace initiative shall be rejected and that jihad against Israel is the only acceptable way to achieve peace. Now, here's a picture of Hamas's covenant. As you can see, this was the original charter they wrote. Its preamble states that, quote, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. It also calls for jihad by saying, quote, the day the enemies usurp part of Muslim land, jihad becomes the individual duty of every Muslim. In the face of the Jews' usurpation, it is compulsory that the banner of jihad be raised. That's in Article 15. Now, there are too many evil sentences to choose from within this covenant, but I will say this one is a final example of anti-Semitic incitement to violence. Quote, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then, the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees. And the rocks and trees will cry out, "Oh Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." Since Hamas has been in power, Gaza has been subject to their oppressive one-party rule, and they have pursued a policy of jihad against the state of Israel with the goal of absorbing Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip into one Islamic state. It is also worth noting that Hamas receives heavy funding from Iran, and according to the U.S. State Department, they receive upwards of $100 million a year from Iran. And that's just the reported number. I'm sure it's a lot higher. Hamas also receives hundreds of millions of dollars in support from Qatar, and the terrorist group's leaders currently reside there, living in villas that only billionaires can afford while the people of Gaza suffer. Sadly, pretty much all of the UNWRA's aid also ends up helping Hamas, as it is almost impossible to send aid to Palestinian refugees without Hamas taking it for themselves or benefiting in some way.
انت عارف انه كل الناس هذه ما حدش لا لاقي شرب واكل.
كلهم بيعانوا.
الوضع صعب، لا تدخل مساعدات.
ما في المساعدات كلها نازله تحت. المساعدات ما بيجوا للامه ولا بيجي للشعب. انا كل الدعم بيجي لقطاع غزه.
بس حج كثير بيوصل، اللي بيوصل إشي قليل وبيتوزع هيك بيحكوا.
كله للبيوت إلهم. خليهم ياخذون ولا يطخون ولا يعملوا بدهم اياه حماس.
حج احنا الان يبدو
Hamas's position on being against a two-state solution with Israel and their religious fundamentalism has led to the group being fairly popular among Palestinians. In a 2021 poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, 53% of 1,200 Palestinians surveyed said they believe that Hamas is, quote, most deserving of representing and leading the Palestinian people. A poll taken in the Gaza Strip and West Bank in early September shows that 34% of Palestinians would vote for Hamas versus 36% who would vote for Fatah. Former UN ambassador and current US presidential candidate Nikki Haley has said from her experience as an ambassador previously in Gaza that, quote, half of Palestinians don't want to be governed by Hamas. All of this adds up, and while I would take polling results from a state run by a regime like Hamas with a grain of salt, it seems that Palestinians are roughly evenly split on supporting Hamas according to all available data. It is also worth noting that the opposing party, Fatah, also calls for the destruction of Israel and recently praised Hamas fighters involved in the October 7th attack. More recent polling from right before the October 7th attack suggests that only 24% of Palestinians support a two-state solution. This is down from 59% in 2012. This goes to show that more Palestinians may be against Hamas being in power, but antisemitism and the belief that Israel's existence is illegitimate is still a prevalent belief. There is much work to be done in order to find peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but no progress can be made until Hamas is gone. I see a lot of calls for a ceasefire and people blaming Israel for carrying out genocidal massacres as the civilian death toll rises in Gaza. First of all, anyone calling for a ceasefire is assuming that both parties want the same thing, which is peace. This is false. Hamas does not want peace. They want every Jew in Israel and across the world to be murdered, as they state in their own founding charter and on live television. And before we get to talking more about a ceasefire, I would like to remind you that on October 7th, 2023, Hamas invaded Israel and indiscriminately killed 1,400 innocent Jews of all ages and took 240 of them hostage. These barbaric animals went door to door in Jewish communities. They raped women in front of their families, gouged eyes out and cut limbs off of children and their parents, and tied up families together and burned them alive. Not even the infants were safe from being riddled with bullets or being thrown in the fire. Adjusting to the population of the US and Israel, this is equivalent to America losing 40,000 people to the 9/11 attacks. There is no ceasefire or negotiating with pure evil. There is just eradicating it. If you are still pushing for a ceasefire in this situation, there's a central component you're missing if you're pushing this position or you believe that Israel is carrying out an ethnic cleansing genocide. Israel does not want dead civilians. Civilian casualties are usually an unintended consequence of war, but for a group like Hamas, dead civilians is the intention. In fact, Hamas officials have been recently publishing videos of them praising civilian sacrifice and criticizing Israel for being a culture that values life. Hamas does not see death as a bad thing, but instead views it as martyrdom and ammo to use against Israel. They have molded their military and civilian infrastructures into being one and the same. And if you don't believe me, here's a video of Hamas senior official Ali Bakara being interviewed on live television on October 8th.
بخاف من الأسر وبخاف يموت. الإسرائيلي معروف عنه أنه بحب الحياة. إحنا بنضحي، نعتبر أنه قتلانا شهداء. فأمنا يعني أهم أمنية عند أي واحد فلسطيني أنه يستشهد في سبيل الله.
They said that, not me. While Hamas currently has efforts underway to maximize civilian deaths, Israel's been going out of its way to minimize civilian deaths. No other military in the world takes as many steps as Israel does in order to ensure that civilians are warned of incoming missile strikes. Israel drops flyers telling civilians to leave imminent war zones, making warnings on the radio. They make calls to civilians that tell them to evacuate buildings, and they also drop incredibly loud non-lethal warning shells on buildings in order to let anyone inside know that they're within the vicinity of a target area and should evacuate immediately. Israel could easily take out all of Hamas from the air without losing a single Israeli soldier, but instead, the IDF in certain areas of Gaza is sending in troops on the ground in order to reduce civilian casualties. As of November 14th, 2023, the IDF has lost 46 troops in Gaza since this war began. Israeli soldiers are currently losing their lives in an attempt to protect civilians in Gaza from consequences caused by Hamas. Hamas, on the other hand, has been telling civilians to stay. They've been blockading streets, not allowing civilians to leave. They have killed escaping civilians on multiple occasions and have built their weapons bunkers inside and underneath schools, hospitals, mosques, and in residential areas in Gaza. There is a reason for all of this. Hamas hides behind innocent civilians while keeping them in the line of fire in order to turn around and say, look how awful Israel is. Demanding a ceasefire is an easy way to enable this kind of behavior from Hamas and allow it to go unchecked. It sends a message to Hamas that they can murder 1,400 Jews, take 240 of them hostage, and use Palestinian civilians as human shields and not face any retaliation. If Israel gives in to a ceasefire, then these terrorists can get away with literally anything. Is Israel supposed to do nothing every time they're attacked by Hamas because civilians will die? The whole point of Hamas using Palestinians as human shields is for that exact reason. The whole point is for them to attack Israel, get civilians killed when Israel attacks back, and then they rely on you to demand a ceasefire so that they may do this repeatedly without consequences. And we know for a fact they will do this again and again out of hatred towards the Jews. Here's senior Hamas official Ali Bakara again saying just that, not long after the October 7th massacre.
وجود إسرائيل غير منطقي. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها. إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها، وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثاني وثالث ورابعة، في 7 أكتوبر، في 10 أكتوبر، في مليون أكتوبر، إحنا اللي بنعمل مبرر. It is justified، مبررة.
I will again reread the text of what was just said in this video because it's very important to note that these are the positions that Hamas publicly brags about. Bakara said, quote, "The existence of Israel is illogical. We must remove that country. We must teach Israel a lesson, and we will do this again and again. The Al-Aqsa flood is just the first time. There will be a second, a third, a fourth. On October 7th, October 10th, October 1 millionth. Everything we do is justified. It is justified, justified." The IDF in Israel has a responsibility to protect its citizens from being killed, which means they will target and destroy Hamas bases in Gaza that are launching missiles at Israel. It is not the fault of Israel for civilians dying when the bases they're destroying are purposely built by Hamas in high-density civilian areas. Like I said before, the intention for Hamas is to put as many civilians near targeted areas as possible. This blood is on their hands. There is a difference between the deliberate goal of getting civilians killed by Israeli rockets and the taking of civilian lives that is unintended, undesired, and unavoidable. Israel defending itself and killing civilians who wouldn't be there in the first place if it weren't for Hamas is awful, but it's not a genocide. It's self-defense, and Hamas is pure evil and the scum of the earth for purposely putting civilians in harm's way. Israel saying they need to defend themselves and destroy Hamas is not genocidal rhetoric either. If you'd like to hear what genocidal rhetoric sounds like, take a look again at Hamas's covenant and their founding charter that calls for the worldwide extermination of Jews. Take a look again also at the popular slogan you're hearing that says, quote, "To the river from the sea, Palestine will be free," which calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, therefore erasing the state of Israel and its people. If you'd like to see what genocidal behavior looks like, take notice of what Hamas did on October 7th, when they raped, murdered, and tortured 1,400 Jews with the sole intention of that day being to kill as many innocent Jews as they possibly could simply for being Jewish. I find it odd that we set an entirely new military standard for Israel. In fact, we set a standard for Israel that we haven't set for any war ever. Can you name the last war in which we said we shouldn't attack the enemy because civilians will die in their territory? I can't. Israel endures the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and yet we don't think they should be able to defend themselves because civilians will die. Newsflash, every war ever fought results in civilian deaths and violations of human rights. This is one of several reasons why war is awful. Israel defending itself from terrorists is not the same thing as Hamas invading and murdering 1,400 innocent Israelis. Let's stop drawing a moral equivalence between the two and pretending they're the same. They're not. Hamas trying to kill every innocent civilian they could on October 7th is not the same thing as Israel targeting terrorists while trying to minimize civilian casualties. You have to pretend away the entire conflict to even remotely preach moral equivalence between the two. You have to pretend that Israel isn't defending itself from a regime whose official documents state they want Jews exterminated and who prop up civilians in front of Israeli rockets. If Israel was truly a monster who goes out of its way to kill civilians, there would be no incentive for Hamas to get civilians killed in the first place. In a nutshell, much of the pro-Palestine movement ignores history. Anytime you hear of Israel doing something awful or supposedly genocidal, I really do encourage you to look at what happened leading up to that event. You can see people leaving out history in real time right now. People are demanding a ceasefire and are acting like Israel is indiscriminately bombing civilian areas unprovoked, as if the worst Jewish massacre since the Holocaust didn't just happen. None of this would be happening at all if it weren't for Hamas's October 7th attack. Israel didn't just wake up one day and decide to start bombing Gaza. Regretfully, Hamas chooses to carry out war this way by ensuring innocent civilians die. But if Israel wants to win this war and destroy Hamas, then this war must be fought. Israel is fighting more than a national security threat. They're fighting for their very survival as a country. There isn't just a new standard for Israel when it comes to actual warfare, but there's also blame towards Israel for the Palestinian refugees' state of living and an expectation for Israel to be taking care of all of them. So my question is, why is this all on Israel? And why is Israel solely responsible for the well-being of citizens whose elected representatives want worldwide Jewish extermination? Hamas doesn't just use Palestinians as human shields, they also take advantage of their emotions for purposes of indoctrination. No sane state, such as Israel, would take in any citizens who don't believe in a two-state solution but instead wish for their country's destruction. It boggles my mind that the current living conditions of these Palestinian refugees are solely the fault of Israel when they've been left in the dust by their own Arab nations for 70 plus years. When 900,000 Jews fled or were expelled from Muslim nations following the founding of Israel, Israel took in all of them. Arab nations cannot say the same for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians they've neglected. And this may be because every Arab nation that has taken in Palestinians has found themselves in domestic chaos shortly after doing so. So for example, Jordan took in Palestinians in the 1960s, which led to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, trying to overthrow the Jordanian King Hussein, and the Palestinian terror group Black September assassinated the Jordanian Prime Minister. The PLO moved to Lebanon in the late 1960s, and the country found itself in the midst of a nasty civil war only a few years later, which then later led to the creation of the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah in retaliation to Israel's 1982 invasion of southern Lebanon, which that invasion by Israel was in response to an attempted assassination of Israel's ambassador to the UK following many attacks back and forth between the IDF and the PLO on Lebanon's southern border. In 1991, the Kuwaiti government expelled nearly 300,000 Palestinians in the wake of the First Gulf War due to the PLO supporting Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait a year earlier. The PLO's support towards Iraq's occupation grew once Iraq began attacking Israel with rockets throughout the war. The Kuwaiti government considered much of the Palestinian community to be complicit in the Iraqi occupation of their country in the aftermath of Kuwait's liberation, and nearly all Palestinians were deported in response. Fast forward to now, where none of these Arab nations have helped these Palestinian refugees and continue to say that they are not welcome in their countries. There's also no outrage and a lack of condemnation towards Hamas with what they've done to the Palestinian people. People love to blame Israel for the living conditions of Palestinian refugees while turning a blind eye to the fact that Hamas has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on military infrastructure and building underground tunnels through the use of child labor. They've also dug up water pipes in Gaza to repurpose them into missiles to use against Israel, and they steal humanitarian aid from UN refugee agencies meant for Palestinian civilians. According to the New York Times, a senior Lebanese official stated that Hamas, which is estimated to number between 35 to 40,000 people, has enough food, water, and fuel to keep fighting for 3 to 4 months with no resupply. Hamas hoards all of this while Palestinians suffer and starve. Senior Hamas official Ali Bakara yet again makes no attempt at hiding the ball when he said this in an October 8th TV interview.
مشغولة بالحكومة في غزة وبدها تدير بالها على 1.5 مليون فلسطيني وملتهية وخلص تركت المقاومة، لكن حماس من تحت الطاولة كانت تحضر لهذه العملية الكبيرة.
Hamas is clearly very bad for the Palestinian people and openly admits that they prioritize killing Jews over actually governing and helping their constituents. And this should be a main reason for people on both sides of this conflict to want Hamas to be destroyed. But no, many in the pro-Palestine crowd instead shift the focus to Israel, blaming them for cutting off water and electricity from the Palestinians in Gaza, while brushing over the fact that Israel has only ever provided 10% of Gaza's water supply, and for free. They also don't consider that since Hamas is currently telling civilians to stay, Israel cutting off water and electricity is a way to force civilians to evacuate war zones. The fact that the people shouting Free Palestine don't condemn Hamas for their actions hurting the Palestinian people, while pushing false narratives of Israel being a genocidal ethnic cleanser, is all the proof I need to figure out that their movement is more about destroying Israel than helping Palestinians. If you don't believe me, I ask a few things for you to consider. Where are the protests against Hamas in the Arab world? Can you find a single example of a Free Palestine protest condemning Hamas? I also challenge you to find any Palestinian authorities or anyone in any of these protests who believes in a two-state solution. I can't, because they don't believe in a two-state solution. If they truly wanted one, they would call for Hamas to be destroyed or condemn them at the very least, but instead they push for the full decolonization of Israel from the river to the sea, which, in other words, means they push for the destruction of Israel and its people. Sadly, nothing has changed. Another false narrative surrounding Israel is that it is an apartheid state. People seem to get this notion by only taking into account the dual system of laws in the shared West Bank territory, rather than observing what Israel's actual laws are within its borders. Sure, you can find examples of people in Israel holding ill views towards Arab people. Both sides hold grudges towards one another. It's a nasty symptom of being in a decades-long conflict with one another. But you're missing the big picture if this is all you're fixated on. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Israel's founding documents call for Arabs to be included in society with equal rights. Israel also has a sitting Supreme Court justice who is Arab. An Arab party currently exists in the Israeli government, and 21% of Israel's general population is Arab, and about half of their pharmacists are Arab as well. Arabs arguably have more rights in Israel than they do in their own countries. An example of this is the fact that Arab women can vote in Israel, which is something they can't do basically anywhere else in the Middle East. All of these facts fly in the face of an apartheid state narrative. Nobody talks about what rights Jews have in Palestine because they don't exist. No Jews live there because you couldn't possibly live there as a Jew. The majority of Palestinians live under Palestinian rule in the West Bank, while there are effectively zero Jews living under Palestinian rule. Just the fact that the US has assisted and is such close allies with the only Jewish state that has been attacked over and over again just for existing should say a lot about our country's character and how good we are. Do you want to know why Israel is a valuable ally? They're one of the only countries in that region of the world building itself as a democracy and have better human rights than the countries surrounding it. No, they aren't perfect. Every nation has a history of making mistakes. Look at the US. Look at the US with the treatment of Native Americans, African Americans, and Muslims after 9/11. Those are just a few out of several examples. But it's not the mistakes that define a nation, but how to handle and acknowledge the mistakes going forward. It's about the freedom of people within those nations to be able to express themselves, fight back, and demand change. Israel allows that, and so does the US. How many Muslim nations allow that? These ignorant college students and people rallying around the world calling for a ceasefire or an end to the state of Israel are actually rallying for a cause and leadership that, if they won and ruled, would limit or cut off their own rights to rally, to be educated, and to express themselves. No nation is perfect, but the nations that allow their citizens to hold differing opinions, to demand change, and speak up about wrongs are what we're fighting for. This is what Israel has enabled and is the very reason that Israel was declared a Jewish state and given as a safe haven for Jews after the atrocities of the Holocaust. Israel is a beacon of human rights and courage in an area of the world that is steeped in antisemitism and terrorism and is not something to give up on. Israel is also the only homeland and state in the world to the Jewish people who have been historically persecuted nonstop for existing. That is why we have given so much to Israel, so that it may defend itself and stay standing as a home for the Jewish people and as a country that upholds Western notions of being a democracy. We're not only helping the world by allying with Israel, but we're defending against religious persecution by a government regime. It is of the utmost importance that we achieve peace through strength by supporting Israel in their war to destroy Iran's proxy, Hamas, while they defend themselves from Hezbollah in the north. I made this video in order to combat false narratives being perpetuated about Israel and onto the Jewish community worldwide. Believing false narratives about Jewish people is how every bad thing has happened to them historically, and as Americans, it is our duty to stand up for the truth and combat the waves of anti-Semitism we're seeing around the world right now. In order to do that, it is important to recognize that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. If you're telling me that the belief of anti-Zionism up to the destruction of the state of Israel and its people isn't anti-Semitic, then you're either ignorant or an anti-Semite yourself. I'm not sure how else to put that. Like I mentioned before, please find me an example of one free Palestine rally happening around the world that doesn't call for a one-state solution that includes the erasure of Israel and its people. The amount of rallies with chants saying Intifada until victory or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is terrifying and a call for violence. And this is happening in mass rallies with hundreds of thousands of people, such as the marches in London. Here's some video of the march in London. Now imagine that 1,400 innocent Israelis get butchered by a terror organization that calls for worldwide Jewish extermination, and the global reaction is hundreds of thousands of people waving the flag of the state run by the regime who carried out these crimes. And all the while, they don't condemn the terror organization and instead call for Israel's existence to be erased in order to end their colonization of the land. That is what is happening.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
And here's a free Palestine protester in London ranting about Israel and saying that, quote, Hitler knew how to deal with these people.
Then they will know what kind of people these are. Why every so many 100 years the Zionists get slaughtered? Because Hitler knew how to deal with these people.
Here's a video of a smaller rally in Sydney, Australia, outside of the iconic Opera House. Do you hear what these Palestinian flag wavers are yelling? Because if you think you're crazy, you're not. These protesters are chanting, "Gas the Jews." In case you're wondering, this isn't 1939, it's 2023. But it's okay, guys. This is all in the name of standing up for the oppressed and getting those Jewish colonizers to cease their evil behavior and give up their homeland. It's for a good cause, after all. Another incident recently occurred at an airport in Dagestan, Russia. A flight landed in Dagestan from Israel, and hundreds of people waving Palestine flags stormed the airport and ran onto the tarmac to surround the aircraft. According to multiple reports, people in the mob were yelling Allahu Akbar and intended to harm or kill the returning Jews on the flight. Around the same time, a Jewish cultural center under construction in Russia burned to the ground, and the message "Death to Yahuds," which means Jews, was left in graffiti. 2 Jewish schools were also shot at overnight on November 10th in Montreal, just 3 days after Molotov cocktails were thrown at a Jewish community center in the city. Nearly 100 hate incidents have occurred in Montreal since October 7th. That is just one city. A synagogue in Berlin was firebombed on October 18th. A synagogue in Tunisia was burned to the ground. And a mob of pro-Palestine rioters attacked a synagogue in Melilla, North Africa, while worshippers were inside. If you'd like a more clear idea of how many things like this are happening, just Google the term synagogue, click on the news tab. You'll see tons of stories of synagogues being threatened, attacked, or evacuated. The Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, has recorded a total of 312 anti-Semitic incidents between October 7th to October 23rd in the United States. That equates to just over 18 incidents of anti-Semitic hate crimes per day in just that period of time. Our own media even feels the need to publish Hamas's lies and contribute to this spike in anti-Semitism. On October 17th, 2023, an explosion took place in the parking lot at Al Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza. Hamas immediately blamed the incident on an Israeli airstrike, and Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry reported 471 killed in a record fashion. Before any fact-checking or investigating could occur on this matter, our mainstream media swiftly bought Hamas' side of the story and published it everywhere. As you can see in this picture I'm showing you, these are all mainstream media headlines repeating Hamas' lies. As it turns out, the death toll was lower than was previously reported, and all evidence points to this incident being caused by a failed Hamas rocket launch. There was a phone call between two Hamas soldiers admitting fault for the incident, drone footage, and IDF radar evidence that debunks Hamas's claim. As of October 17, 2023, the IDF released a statement confirming that around 450 Hamas rockets have misfired or fallen short in Gaza. Sadly, U.S. politicians like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib did not get the memo. They both publicly blamed Israel for the hospital incident and repeated Hamas's lies. Omar eventually apologized for being wrong about the incident, while Tlaib has tripled down on her stance and repeatedly touted this falsehood. Rashida Tlaib has also posted on social media and said out loud the genocidal phrase, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," on multiple occasions. We cannot forget who these people are within our government, and we must vote out anyone who spreads lies coming from terrorists and repeats their violent talking points. If anything, the bar is pretty low. Now let's take a look at what's happening nationwide on college campuses. Do you remember colleges canceling speakers because of the words of their differing political opinions, supposedly equating to violence and hurting people's feelings? Well, as if colleges hadn't already lost their credibility a long time ago, they now have nothing to say about students on their campus openly advocating for violence against Jews. In fact, it seems that colleges are breeding a generation of young people with anti-Semitic views. And an absolutely shocking result, a recent Harvard-Harris poll shows that 51% of Americans aged 18 to 24 believe Hamas was justified in its brutal terrorist attacks on the innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th. You may think, oh, well, it's just one poll. They didn't actually mean that. Well, their actions say otherwise. And here are a few examples of appalling demonstrations occurring on campuses nationwide. So, first up, we have a video taken at Tulane University of students burning an Israel flag and then assaulting a Jewish student who tries to stop it from happening, as you can see in the video. And the fact that the students in this video are dressed up in Hamas garb is both terrifying and cowardly. You shouldn't have to cover your face, unless, of course, your cause calls for violence against Jews. This next video is taken at UCLA, and it depicts hundreds of pro-Palestine students chanting Intifada as they march on campus. I would like to remind you that Intifada is a call for resistance and an armed rebellion. Here's another video, taken on campus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You can hear the leader of this crowd yelling, "Glory to the martyrs," as the crowd responds with "Glory to the resistance." And then she says, "We will liberate the land," and instructs the crowd to respond to this by saying, "By any means necessary."
There you go. We will liberate the land by any means necessary. We will liberate the land!
Nothing to see here, just a peaceful student organization calling dead terrorists martyrs and advocating for Israel to cease existing by any means necessary. It's a good cause after all, like I said before, it's fine. Here's yet another video filmed at University of Pennsylvania of a pro-Palestine group yelling, "Israel, Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide."
Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
This is not just the false moral equivalence I mentioned before, but also extreme gaslighting. They charge Israel with genocide for defending itself while also blaming Israel of committing the crime that Hamas itself perpetrates on Israelis. Disgusting rhetoric. Here's some real pictures of absolutely chilling messages being projected onto buildings on the campus of George Washington University. As you can see in these pictures, the different messages read, "Glory to our martyrs," divestment from Zionist genocide now, and free Palestine from the river to the sea. According to the school's newspaper, demonstrators specified that glory to our martyrs was in reference to the Palestinians killed by Israel and not to Hamas. This still doesn't make their messaging any better, considering they are directly adopting the language of Hamas, referring to dead Palestinians as martyrs to their cause, as you saw on the TV earlier with Hamas senior official Ali Bakara. They adopted Hamas's language again by inserting the message, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which, as I've said before, is a direct call for the elimination and destruction of Israel. This same phrase was chanted by students marching in the hallways of a San Francisco high school. As you can see in this video, these kids are running through the halls, chanting this about Palestine. Now, I can't even imagine what you would be thinking as a high school student, especially if you're Jewish and seeing this. And here we have a history professor at Cornell University that he stated on October 15th that he felt, quote, energized and exhilarated by Hamas's October 7th violence, which he viewed as a defining moment for the Palestinians resisting and breaking free from Israel's apartheid, quote, monopoly of violence.
It was exhilarating. It was exhilarating. It was energizing. And if they weren't exhilarated by this challenge to the monopoly of violence, by this shifting of the balance of power, then they would not be human. I was exhilarated.
According to him, violence is an absolutely awful thing, but it's an energizing sign of resistance when it's perpetrated against Israel from people within Palestine's borders. What a joke it is that this guy's teaching students. Supposedly, he's one of our great moral leaders in society. Another trend I'm seeing all across schools nationwide and in our cities is people tearing down missing people posters of kidnapped or missing Israelis in the wake of the October 7th attack. I don't care whether you're pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. This is evil behavior. There is no humane reason you can come up with to justify taking down these posters. Actually, an Israeli student was actually attacked with a stick on October 11th outside of the main library at the University of Columbia because he tried to confront another student who was tearing down flyers of Israelis who were kidnapped by Hamas. On November 6th, a University of Massachusetts student was arrested after punching a Jewish student and spitting on their Israel flag during a vigil that was being held for the 240 hostages taken by Hamas in Gaza. Yeah, imagine there's a vigil on your college campus for 240 innocent people taken by a terrorist group, and that pisses you off. On November 10th, 2 college students in Ohio were assaulted as part of a Jewish hate crime, and a nearby Jewish center was vandalized. Student groups belonging to California State University in Long Beach sent out flyers for a, quote, Day of Resistance as a protest for Palestine. And as you can see, this flyer includes a picture of a Palestinian paraglider, which is a direct nod to Hamas's October 7th slaughter at the Re'im Music Festival in Israel, in which Hamas soldiers flew in motorized paragliders and murdered 260 people. BLM Chicago also posted a picture of a Palestinian paratrooper with a graphic that reads, I stand with Palestine. Now, according to the ADL, Salt Lake City's Democratic Socialists of America chapter put out a statement on October 7th expressing their, quote, unwavering solidarity with the people of Palestine in their decades-long fight for national liberation, and urged Americans to, quote, stand up against settler colonial Zionist apartheid. They followed this up by supporting Hamas's attack on innocent Israeli civilians and wrote that, quote, it is not terrorism or antisemitism to fight against this injustice. Excuses for violence. Another DSA chapter in San Francisco made a statement on October 9th by saying, violent oppression inevitably produces resistance. Socialists support the Palestinian people's and all peoples' right to resist and fight for their own liberation. This weekend's events are no different. Decolonization is the only path towards peace. A better world is possible. We call on all those who share our vision of global working class emancipation to join the fight to end the occupation and decolonize Palestine from the river to the sea. Of course, they had to add that phrase. It's always wonderful, too, to see people looking at an event of trying to kill as many Jews as possible from terror group and equating that to just Palestinian resistance. That's not resistance, that's calculated murder is what it is. The ADL actually compiled an entire list of numerous instances of Democratic Socialists of America and Black Lives Matter chapters across the nation openly praising and supporting the worst Jewish slaughter since the Holocaust, siding with Hamas and touting genocidal language that calls for Israel's existence to be erased. There are honestly so many instances of college students, student organizations, and professors sympathizing with Hamas over Israel that I could do an entire hours-long video on just that. And yes, it would take hours for me to go over and explain every recent incident occurring on college campuses. This is all very disturbing and should absolutely be called out. These are the major red flags I see with the Free Palestine movement. If the movement truly cared for Palestinian civilians, its supporters would also be calling for the destruction of Hamas. But instead, they refuse to condemn them while echoing the exact same language they use in advocating for this destruction of the state of Israel. It's important to be aware of the fact that this movement is a driving force for terror and open calls for violence against Jews around the world right now. And this movement relies on you pushing this hate in the name of human rights. People wonder how something like the Holocaust happened. Refusing to condemn this type of behavior is how. Refusing to condemn the genocidal terror group wanting to wipe Jews off the face of the earth while adopting their phrases is how you justify the continuance of this type of behavior. I'm not Jewish, and it shouldn't require being Jewish to recognize evil. We need more voices in support of our Jewish friends and to let them know that we are not okay with what we're seeing around the world right now. They need to know that they're not alone and that this hatred will not go unnoticed. Jews around the world are extremely defensive and sensitive when it comes to antisemitism and violent acts being perpetrated against them. They grew up learning about family members who were killed in the Holocaust, gassed in the chambers while naked and starving, heads shaved holding their babies, believing they're about to get a shower. They grew up being told about their parents or grandparents hiding their Jewishness to be accepted, to feel safe. The trauma of that persecution is still fresh, and that's what Israel is currently protecting itself from. To the Jewish community, October 7th looked all too familiar. The Jews have a large history of being persecuted or facing anti-Semitism, and Israel has been no exception to this. The Jews in Israel have been attacked repeatedly by a group of people whose official doctrines state that Jews should be exterminated worldwide and have refused or ignored every peace deal offered to them. In fact, they don't even believe peace is achievable unless the Jews are dead. This is the bigger picture here that many people are missing. Hamas is relying on our ignorance to view this conflict through a victimization and oppression scheme being carried out by Israel in order to side with a movement that pushes their own talking points and calls for the erasure of the state of Israel. You could choose to focus solely on your specific reasons for not liking Israel and calling the Israelis monsters for their aggression in reaction to the unspeakable violence that was perpetrated against them. Or you can accept the fact that there will never be peace in a region where a regime exists that wants Jews exterminated and who uses Palestinian civilians as cannon fodder to further their cause. Hamas must be destroyed both for a freer Palestine and a safer Israel, and we should all be getting behind Israel to destroy Hamas for the betterment of the world. Peace cannot be attempted while a regime like Hamas exists, and for relations between Israelis and Palestinians to improve, Israel must completely destroy Hamas. A famous quote that I think holds true goes like this: "If Israel gave up its guns, there would be no Israel. If the Arabs gave up their guns, there would be peace tomorrow." God bless you. Thank you for watching this video.